Some people say that we all have our time. But could you outrun that time? Well, there are certainly some people who serve as examples for, yeah, you can. Here's the top 13 people who vanished in history. Number 13, Bilela Kiss. His native name was Kiss Biela, actually, and that native land would be the land of Hungary. Back then, though, it was jointly Austria-Hungary, and he fought bravely for it in the First World War. While Kiss was on the front lines, neighbors complained and notified police about several gas cans littering the soldier's house. When police finally cracked open one to use for the war effort, they found a woman's mutilated body stuffed inside. A total of 24 corpses were identified at Biela's house. Military police immediately tracked the hospital room where the man was recuperating from battle, only to find someone else's dead body in his bed. Bilela Kiss was never officially seen again. 12. Nikolai Days Off. Nikolai Days Off ran the Soviet NKVD secret police from 1936 to 38, making him a conductor for Joseph Stalin's genocidal symphonies when the Soviet dictator murdered everyone who opposed him and his very illegitimate rule. Days Off had no idea that he eventually would be a victim to his own system. Even though his trial and his eventual execution for allegedly being a spy is indeed confirmed, he's remembered today as the Vanishing Commissioner due to this infamous picture. Nikolai is a symbol of how government brutality is one of the worst evils around and can literally make people vanish if it wants to. 11. Lieutenant Felix Moncla. Another faithful veteran of a world war, Moncla served in the early 1950s as a stationary fighter pilot at an Air Force base in northern Michigan. When an unidentified object was spotted on radar, Moncla and his co-pilot, Robert L. Wilson, pursued the mysterious target. Being unable to find it, Moncla used his radar to fly closer until both objects spontaneously disappeared at the same time on radar. The U.S. Air Force officially reports that the incident was a crash with a Canadian airplane across the border, despite the fact that the CRAF reported that no aircraft were stationed on that day. 10. The Mayans. We've lost kings, we've lost families, we've even lost entire colonies and cities. The entire civilization of a unique people is a bit of a stretch. By the time of their post-classic period, the Mayans ruled over much of southern Mexico. And what's so baffling is how a people as sophisticated and as advanced as them seemingly vanished so quickly around 950 AD, when citizens began spontaneously abandoning their stone cities one by one. There's no doubt that the Maya were an overpopulated nation, but it's so difficult to explain the sudden disappearance of an entire empire for seemingly no reason. 9. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is one of the finest emperors and military conquerors who ever lived, building an empire stretching from Egypt to Afghanistan. Dying at only 32, his glorious nation died with him as it divided without his leadership. There was a time, though, when Alexander's tomb was a hero's shrine for anyone to visit before looters eventually lost the sacred body. Ever since, finding one of the greatest kings in history has become a worldwide adventure, with some people saying that Alexander today is hiding under an ancient city street, in the finest cathedral basements, or simply in a lonely desert tomb. 8. Dracula. We get the name Dracula from Bram Stoker's 1897 novel. Yet Vlad Dracula III is a well-known historical king who served as the inspiration, and certainly got the part. Vlad the Impaler is best known for his brutal and often demonic cruelty to his enemies. The consumption of human blood makes him known as being the real Dracula. Despite being a pious Christian defender of his Transylvanian homeland from the equally cruel Ottoman invaders, Vlad III was decapitated like a vampire. His head was sent to Istanbul, but his body's location is disputed today. Vampire or not, the real Dracula is still out there somewhere. 7. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Perhaps a few people watching this will complain about Amelia Earhart not being on this list. Given how underdeveloped flight technology was during her time, an adventure such as hers had too large of a mortality risk to be deemed surprising, especially in retrospect with today's progress. Or so you would think. In March 2014, Flight 370 lost contact with the world somewhere over the Andaman Sea. The shocking disappearance sparked the largest and most expensive search and rescue in aviation history, all without a single piece of debris found. This spooky and tragic disappearance proves that the invention of the aeroplane doesn't quite make this world as small as we think. 6. Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa was an American Union leader heavily active in the mid and late 20th century, infamous for his ability to influence politics, usually with the help of organized crime. Hoffa is also greatly known for vanishing in the year 1970. Hoffa's various rivals and his obnoxious connections with the mob surely make his disappearance unsurprising, but it's how it was done that was a bigger mystery to this very day. Hoffa is nonetheless proof that even in a developed, democratic state, someone out there will quiet you if you speak too loud. 5. Attila the Hun. People tend to confuse Attila with Jingus Han, who lived 800 years after. It's also believed that he's the grandfather of the country Hungary, also not really true. Nonetheless, Attila was the leader of a Far East Asian tribe most known for its conquest against Rome. Some would say the warrior died due to internal injury, others an assassination by his wife, even by a nosebleed. No matter what, we know that Attila died unarmed, but as for where the ancient tyrant is today, no one knows. His burial site was kept a secret and is still hiding somewhere in Central Europe as one of the greatest treasures that you can still find. 4. Amadeus Mozart. It's good to know that men of culture and fine arts can still make the top 5 on these lists. Yet, a list like this seems odd for one of the greatest and most sophisticated composers of all time. Mozart's resting place is unknown, but so is the cause of his death. The 1980s movie Amadeus portrayed the musician's death to be a poisoning by his jealous rival, Antonio Salieri. And while that is a spooky theory supported by some, his death in the film is flat out wrong by showing Mozart's body being lost in a mass grave with several others. The reality is that Mozart did get his own personal grave, but it wasn't permanent due to him being a commoner, meaning that one of the greatest composers of all time was redug up at one point and lost forever. 3. Adolf Hitler. Although the conspiracy of his death is definitely creepy enough to be number 1, the controversy on if it's really a mystery forces him to be number 3. Mainstream history agrees Hitler committed suicide in Berlin. Yet both Joseph Stalin and the American FBI claim that the German autocrat escaped and faked his death in 1945. Soviet soldiers report the corpse believed to be Hitler being 2 inches shorter than the Führer's actual height. The last remaining piece of skull fragment from that body was analyzed with modern DNA testing. The narrowness and structure of the skull proved that it most likely belonged to a 20 to 40-year-old female. Conspiracists say Hitler escaped Berlin to rebuild the Nazi Reich. Personal documents displaying Hitler's last thoughts seem to say otherwise. Fleeing for his life just doesn't match Hitler's case file. Nonetheless, the lack of hard scientific proof for any theory forces us to say, no, we don't know where Hitler is. 2. Jingus Han. Being responsible for the second largest loss of human life ever, at least artificially, Jingus Han is proof that monsters live beyond just the pages of your bedtime stories. Being the ruler of the largest continuous empire of all time, he's also proof that great nations aren't measured in their size or strength either. Nonetheless, Jingus Han is confirmed to have died in 1227, but like Attila, Jingus Han's followers massacred all the witnesses of his funeral. Even though the situations of his death are indeed confirmed, no one knows where the universal ruler is today, making his tomb one of the greatest unfound treasures of all time. Number 1. Frederick Valentin. Frederick Valentin was an Australian airplane pilot active in the 1970s. Also greatly known for his track record of flying mistakes, and a lack of aerospace education. His mediocre pilot skills don't explain his disappearance, though. Flying over the Bass Strait in 1978, Valentin reported an unknown aircraft hovering 1,000 feet above him on a recorded radio transmission, describing it as long and orbiting over him with a green metallic light, and then claiming that it vanished. The last words of the transmission were, "It's not an aircraft," before Valentin and his plane disappeared.
It's hovering, don't cover me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.